I would say Parlay has enabled the engagement of more students in a class-wide conversation than I was able to achieve before. But more importantly, it's allowed me to take a different role in the class. I've become more of a chronicler of student learning, and that's basically made me an adult in the room who will notate for each student what they're contributing and how they're contributing it. In March, all of our schools, went to distance learning. I was, grasping how will I continue discussion, because that is the hallmark of this English class. That's where the learning really happens, is in conversation. And I told them, okay, we'll do some, Parlay online roundtables. They said, okay, fine, but let's do the live roundtable. I said, well, that's going to be tricky. They're like, no, let's do it. So, using Google Meet or using Zoom, we all split our screens into two windows, had Zoom on one side, had the roundtable on the other. And it was like we never skipped a beat, and we just continued the kind of enriching the literary discussions that we were having when we were in the brick and mortar school. Now we were remote, and it was still working. And students overwhelmingly said it is successful in the remote environment. The feature itself of instantaneous feedback to my students, that for me is the most important. Is when they have that notification pop up and you see a grin on their face because you're mostly affirming them, it kind of, as a self-fulfilling prophecy, makes them want to contribute again. This simultaneous feedback has really created great culture that way. Maybe just agency in the process, whereas in a 25-person class in previous literary discussions, they may feel like they don't have much agency if they don't raise their hand high enough, if they're not obnoxious enough to get into the conversation. But I think Parlay gives them more agency through the tap-in system. The fact that they, by tapping in, are announcing that they have something to say. I love that they can write a shorthand version of what their question will be, what their challenge will be, what their new idea will be. That's really neat. And then, displaying data at the end for them to discuss is different from what you would have in a traditional conversation where you don't have any data. And then the fact that there's the little ear icon, they ended up using the ear icon to hear the voices that they didn't hear very much. They really wanted to find out what that student over there had to think. And so they were uplifting voices that didn't always put themselves at the center of the circle. But by tapping in, showing that energy, that willingness, that confidence, that courage, their classmates rewarded them by giving them that ear icon to uplift and promote their voice. Like facilitating, that's what Parlay is for me. It creates this great organizational framework that puts students at ease, since everything is pretty clearly defined, like what a tap-in is, the 4 different types. The notes that students take are really close by to them, and that gives them confidence and makes them feel at ease. The polling I do can be in advance or it can be ad hoc, and so all of that creates an organizational ease that facilitates conversation, and hopefully Parlay kind of dissolves into the background of what's most important, which are the ideas, the questions that students are pursuing in the discussion. When we were reading Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, one of the kind of pre-election activities is talking about race and racism and anti-racism. And each student took one of Harvard's implicit bias tests on race. And it was amazing. I was really nervous about being teacher absent in this conversation where, you're just not sure where it's going to go. But I was really amazed and heartened by the kind of delicate and meaningful discussion students had about the results of their implicit bias tests. And what was remarkable about the conversation is that eventually it turned into they were predicting what implicit bias test results the characters from the novel would have. So like, where would Tom fall? Where would Jim fall? Where would Huck fall in the implicit bias test? I really liked how synthesizing they were being. And I think a lot of that comes from their comfortability. We had built a good culture of discussion before we even went to Parlay. But that's one memorable story. I think it promotes listening. because some of the buttons like add or build on or challenge, those require that you understood what the person prior to you said. And that, for me, is one of the hallmarks of great conversations, is the ability to listen ahead of responding. So I think it promotes good listening. I think it shows that preparation for conversation matters. We often have guiding questions and 5 minutes of time in the notes panel to take notes ahead of time of the discussion, to show students that you can't always just show up to a conversation for it to be meaningful. Sometimes you have to do some preparation. I think Parlay reveals that. And then I think Parlay honors and values student engagement because it records everything. You know, it records tap-ins and minutes and types of tap-in. And the fact that there's a report at the end of that is a way of honoring the students as a whole, but then also the students individually when I export it to a spreadsheet. And I appreciate those three ways that Parlay helps students for future discussions.